Okay, my favorite sixth graders, this video is going to go along with lesson 9.3, and this is where we combine everything that we've learned so far, and we're learning two different formulas, if that's what you want to call it, in order to solve percent problems. Now, these are the three things that you're going to have to know how to do. How do I find the percent of a number? How do I find a percent if I'm given a part and a whole? And how do I find a whole if I'm given a percent and a part? Before we can start doing these types of problems, I think it's important that we remind ourselves what we've talked about in class. The first thing that we learned is, what's a ratio? Well, we've been talking about fractions left and right for weeks now, okay? Fractions, when we look at them, are a part to a whole. A ratio is different in math because it allows us a special privilege of being able to compare two different things that otherwise would have no relationship to each other. So that's the difference between a fraction and a ratio. But the way that we're going to use these ratios are identical to how we've been using the fractions in class. It's nothing any different, okay? So that brings us to our next question. What's a proportion? Well, a proportion is where we take two different ratios and we show how they're equal. So every single time you're asked to write a proportion for anything, this is the first thing you should draw. Two fraction bars with an equal sign in between it, because you're showing one thing is equal to the other. And that is how fractions and proportions are alike. It's because you're showing that this ratio in fraction is equal to this ratio in fraction. So that's how we had to know what they are like. Okay, kids, we learned in class that if you're asked to find the percent of a number, there are three different ways that you can do it. Unless you are specifically asked in a math problem to do it a certain way, you find which of these ways is easiest for you. I'm going to tell you right now, for me, this is the easiest, because it's always easiest to multiply by decimals. But that's only one way we've learned in class. You can also multiply by fractions and use proportional reasoning. Okay, kiddos, this is the first way that we have learned how to find a percent, and it's using proportional reasoning. Remember, I just told you, if you're asked to make a proportion, this is the first thing I want you to do. That's all you have to draw. What I want you to think about is how you can label each different part of the problem. There are three different parts of the problem that you need to be able to identify. You need to know what is my part, what is my whole, and what's my percent. If you can do that, the rest will come really easily. The next thing that I want to tell you is a kind of a trick that works almost all the time. When you see the word is, the part is usually right next to the word is. If you see the word of, what's usually right next to that is our whole number. So if I look at this, this says what is, so that means this is our part. What is 46% of 50? Those are the three things that we had to label. Our part, our percent, and our whole. With proportional reasoning, this is what you want to show every single time. You're going to use it every single time without fail. You're going to do your part over your whole and make it equal to something over 100. And that's how you're going to solve it. Okay? So we're going to look at this. What is my part? I don't know. I don't know what that is. What is my percent? Well, I know my percents are always going to have a denominator of 100, and so 46 is going to go on top. My whole number in this problem is 50, okay? So I'm going to put 50 on bottom. Now I solve this exactly like equivalent fractions, to where I say, what do I do to 50 to make it become 100? I multiply it times 2. So guys, look at this. I'm given two numbers on bottom, but only one on top. And I have a hole right here that I'm trying to fill. So I really can't go from left to right. I'm going to have to go the opposite direction. So I have to say, instead of going from left to right, if I start off with 100, what do I do to go to 50? Don't I have to divide by 2? Yes, I divide by 2. So if I do that to the bottom, do the same thing to the top. 46 divided by 2 is 23. So what is 46% of 50? The answer is 23. Okay, the next method that we talked about is how you can multiply by a fraction to find a percent of a number. Right here it says multiply by a fraction to find 75% of 120. So guys, here is our percentage. Of is right next to this, so here is our whole number. Remember, we're always going to use part over a whole equals some number over 100. So let's fill this out. 75% is going to be written like that. And then we have to say, okay, well, I want it to be equal to something with my whole number being 120. Now, if I look at this, I'm going to be real honest with you. I have to multiply. And I put an equal sign there. So you can see that Miss Jen's not perfect. I made a mistake. We're going to multiply by a fraction to find 75%. So what I'm going to do is not set this up as a proportion, but I'm going to do 75 over 100 times 120 over 1. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see what can I simplify here. This didn't work. I can't go from 100 to 120 real evenly, so proportions aren't going to work. But I can tell here I can divide both of these by 10. And that's going to become a 10. That's going to become a 12. Then I have a 10 and a 75. I can divide 5 out of both of those. That's going to become a 2. That's going to become let me make sure I'm not messing up, 15. So now I have a 15, a 2, a 12, and a 1. I still can simplify this and make it easier. I'm going to divide out another 2 and make that a 6. So now I have these 4 numbers left over when multiplying fractions. So now I have to figure out what's going to be over 1. Well, 15 times 6 is 90. So my answer for this problem is, what is 75% of 120? My answer is 90. The last type of problem that we're going to do here is how to multiply by a decimal to find a percent. We're going to change this 3% to a decimal by using the Dr. Pepper trick. That's going to become 0.03. So all I have to do here is multiply 1,200 times 0.03, and it's going to give me my answer. My answer is 36. Those are the easiest for me. That's why I'm going to put a star by this method. It is always easiest to take a percentage, change it to a decimal by using the Dr. Pepper trick, and then just multiplying it. And whatever number you get at the bottom, that's your answer. I just told you that multiplying by a decimal was my favorite method because it seems to be the easiest. So I have one more example of us to do that with. Using the Dr. Pepper trick, I'm changing 27% to be 0.27. So in order to find the percent of this particular number, I'm going to take 300 and multiply it times 0.27. Then I'm going to add that together, and my answer is going to be 81. Okay, kiddos, this is where I think the rubber meets the road. This is where a lot of you are getting confused and a lot of you are making some silly errors. And so I want to go over this real carefully with you. This is a different type of problem, but we're using the exact same formula or the same layout with proportions. If you have to find a percent, if you're given a part and a whole, the first thing I want you to do is to label all the parts. Label what's my percent, what's my part, what's my whole. And I want you to use this proportion. Your part over the whole equals some number over 100. because your percent is always going to be over 100. And here is my word problem. Out of 25 students in Miss Davis's class, 19 have a pet. What percent of the students have a pet? So first of all, let's label our parts. We have 25 students, that's my whole. 19 students, that's my part. But do I have a percent? No, it asks me, what is my percent? So that's what I'm looking for. So let's slide this up now that I've identified it, and we're going to use this particular layout. Our part is 19 over 25, which is our whole, and we want to make that equal to 100 to find the percent right here. In order to go from 25 through 100, I multiply times 4. So I have to do the same thing right here. 19 times 4 is 76. So my answer is 76%. That is how I use that type of problem, if I have to find a percent given a part and a whole. Okay, guys, I know y'all have bared with me for a long time. This is the very last kind of problem you're going to have to learn how to do in my math class as far as percentages are concerned. I've told you I want you to label all the parts. Your percent, your part, and your whole, right? I've also told you that once you find out what you're missing, that will tell you which formula you're going to use. For everything else, you're going to use the part over a whole equals something over 100. Well, look at this kind of problem. It says, what if I want to find a whole number if I'm given a part and a percent? This is what I'm going to use instead. 6 is 30% of something. Remember, whatever is next to is, that is my part. Whatever is next to of, that's my whole number. Do I have my whole number? No, I don't. That's what I'm going to be looking for. But I do have my part and I have my percent. So now I'm going to use this. Take my part, which is 6, multiply it times 100, and then divide that by the percent that you're given. That's going to give me 600 over 30. When I do 600 divided by 30, I get 20 as my answer. So that is how I know my whole number is 20. That's my final answer. So 6 is 30% of the number 20. And guys, if you can figure out how to use those two different formulas based upon what you've got to find, you've got percentages made.